So today we're going to be doing more and Explore Africa series, and today we're going to be looking at the Trans-Saharan trade. Okay, so we're going to learn so much about how important the Trans-Saharan trade was. Okay, so again, you know, we're going to look at the introduction, which is just going to be a general introduction, objectives, general history, timeline. There's a quiz for you guys, and then we will conclude. Mommy. So on the left-hand side, you can see a map, and the map is basically showing the trade route that was the Trans-Saharan trade route. So that's just a snippet of what it was like in those times, and obviously we'll be looking more into this. So so the introduction. So as you can see, the Trans-Saharan trade route was a historic network, and it connected the northern parts and the southern parts of Africa, and you had to cross the Sahara Desert. So the Sahara Desert is somewhere around here. So it was all through here. There's a massive desert there. So this is the northern part of Africa, and everywhere here is the southern part of Africa. And what you would see in a lot of literature is often they refer to this part of Africa, which is the western part of Africa. They tend to refer to it as sub-Saharan Africa, which denotes something quite negative. It's almost like historians and, you know, specialists and whatnot are trying to differentiate between Africans that live in the north, right, as compared to Africans that live in the west and in the south. So I will be choosing purposefully not to use sub-Saharan. I do not use that term. So you will see as continental Africa, okay? So I would refer to the sub-Saharan, which is what literature and history tends to call it. I would refer to it as continental Africa.
What are those?
So basically what you can see is you're seeing the items that made up the trade. So you can see gold, you can see that there were like corals, there was brass, and unfortunately, sadly, there were also slaves, okay? So again, you can see the map, see Asia around there, look at Europe, quite close. The separator was the Mediterranean Sea, and you can see that, you know, the Red Sea led mainly to Asia, Mediterranean to Europe, and then you've got the Atlantic that obviously leads towards the Americas. So you can see that all of Africa was involved in this trade, which is quite a positive thing, other than the slavery. But in terms of the goods that were being sold, that was quite a positive thing, because in a sense that will help develop any economy. So again, we see that this trade network, which I've already mentioned, played a crucial role in the exchange of goods and culture and knowledge between Africa, Northern Africa in particular, and continental. Remember what I said, continental Africa has been referred to as in history books. What did I say it was referred to as? Sub-Saharan. So we call it continental because it's a very prominent, it plays a very prominent role in the history of Africa and in the history of the Trans-Saharan trade.
Does it say Sahara Desert?
Yes. So you can see the Sahara Desert, like I mentioned in the other map. It's along here, and it's a vast desert. It's quite huge. And you can see the red lines. The red lines are the routes of which goods, you know, were transported, right? So you can see the Djenné here, you can see Timbuktu, you can see Gao, you can see Zaria, which makes a part of Nigeria. Then you can hold on. You can see the blue lines are the rivers. So this is the Niger River, which is a very, very prominent river in Nigeria today. And in a sense, that's where Nigeria sort of even gets its name, from the river Niger, right? And we see the Sijil Massa. These are prominent routes along the Trans-Saharan trade routes, okay? So the objectives today is that you will understand the roles of the Trans-Saharan trade and the way it connected North and continental Africa, And then we will look at the types of goods and their cultural significance. And the third is the impact of the Trans-Saharan trade and how that impacted civilizations in terms of the speedy development. This is an item that was found, it was an archaeological find, and it is an image of a camel train from Gerza tomb. So if you look closely, you can see that these are camels. Now, can you see the camels? Can you see the shape of a camel? Can you see that?
Yeah.
So you see these are camels, and you see that someone on the camel. Can you see that person on the camel?
Yeah.
You just about make out, yeah.
He's standing on the camel.
Yes, so that person is on the camel, and from findings like this, you can tell that the evidence shows that the Trans-Saharan trade has been on for thousands of years, okay? And just to give you guys a bit more information, so camels are known as what in the desert? Does anybody know? They're known as ships of the desert, okay? A large group of camels that's ferrying goods or people is known as a caravan, okay? So when you hear a caravan, it's referring to lots and lots of camels, and you'll see some images of lots of camels all, you know, traveling on the Sahara Desert. So typically what happens is that these caravans tend to stop at oases. An oasis, who knows what an oasis is?
Body of water.
It's a body of water in the desert, right?
Oasis.
So yeah. So these caravans will stop at oasis for like refreshment, and that point where it stops and gets its refreshment, it's often referred to as an entrepot. An entrepot is a warehouse or a commercial center where, you know, you have all the goods, you know, everything's packed and stored there, and then it's distributed to other parts of the world. So archaeological findings show a surprising quantity of Roman goods, right, that were transported to the Sahara zone by camel and donkey. And if you remember from the image on the previous slide, that's very possible because look at where Europe is, yeah? Look at Europe there. So the fact that archaeologists find, you know, evidence of Roman items being in the Sahara area, that's not a surprise, right? Because obviously there would have been trade, buying and selling between not just Africans, but so many other, you know, people from all over the world. So next we have this image. Now, who knows what these things are?
I know what those things. They're for
Necklaces and jewelry.
Yeah, but what's the material it's made of?
Pearls.
glass.
No, it's ivory. It says it on there, ivory, okay? So these are like ivories.
I see chess pieces.
And do you know where ivory comes from?
Elephant's tusk.
Elephant tusks, I've mentioned that before. And the interesting thing is that
Mommy, I
ivory,
I see chess pieces.
yes, they're chess pieces there. And what piece can you see?
They're see pawn.
Very good.
And knight.
And what else?
What's
And the rook.
Rook and knight. You already
Yes.
said that.
Oh, I didn't hear that. Okay, fantastic. Well done. Yeah, so basically, ivory is relatively soft. And because it's relatively soft, it's easy to carve it into intricate, you know, ornaments
So you need to make
or
something
intricate
with it.
items. And it's particularly rich people, you know, that wanted ivory. So
So they're selling it.
a lot of the times,
Is the fork and spoon made out of iron?
not the metal bit, but the bottom, the bit that you hold on to, those are made from ivory. So the actual
But it's
fork.
not that white.
So the fork itself is metal, the knife, the blade is metal, but the handle is made from ivory.
But it's
So
not
these
that
parts are
white.
made
It's
from
not
ivory.
that white.
No, it's not. That probably could be due to aging, because sometimes during aging, you know, things change colour, they darken. Because if you look at the necklace, you can see that the necklace has also got a little bit of yellowing around it, so that might be the
Yeah.
aging process. And if you look at that figurine, you can see that as well. There's a bit of yellowing going on, so that's probably the aging process. During the Roman Empire, ivory was exported from Africa. The ivory that was exported from Africa was from the northern Africa, and it was from the North African elephants, right? And these elephants, the Roman Empire sometimes used these elephants in war, right? Or as transport in war or in Colosseum fights, okay? And unfortunately, sadly, these elephants were hunted out of into extinction because, like Missy said, the tusks from the elephant, which is the ivory-looking coloured bit that comes out of the, around the face of the elephant, the tusk, by the time they, harvest the tusk, the elephant doesn't make it. So because they were shooting all these elephants, killing them to take the tusk, obviously the population of the elephants started reducing till there were no more northern African elephants. Medieval times to Renaissance, the trade was from West Africa along the Trans-Saharan trade routes to the north coast, or sometimes they brought East African ivory up in boats along the coastline to the market cities of Northeast Africa and the Middle East. European traders and explorers used rivers connected to the Atlantic to cart the ivory. So you can see that makes sense, because if we go back to this diagram, so like all these rivers, the Mediterranean, they would find smaller rivers within this map area, and that's where they would cart the ivory on boats and whatever so that they could get to the Atlantic Ocean and obviously ship the ivory to whatever destination it is they wanted to. So 1700 to 1900, like I said, unfortunately, slave traders purchased, right, or hunted large number of captives. So they would find these people, get them as slaves, and then force them to carry the ivory that they'd equally taken from the elephant, and force the enslaved people to carry the ivory to the coast. So by the time they get to the coast, it's on a ship and is off to wherever it was that they wanted it to go to.
So, what were they trying to do?
They wanted the ivory. Remember I said that this ivory, because the material is quite soft, it's easy for them to carve into something precious, something that they like. So that's one of the reasons why they wanted ivory, So you can even see, this is the shape of the elephant's tusk. Can you see that? So from the elephant's tusk, they've carved out these little elephants, within that tusk.
And I can see it going a little bit even white.
Exactly. So today, unfortunately, there is still illegal sale of ivory going on.
Ouch.
Unfortunately.
It's still going on.
Now here we see two different types of gold. So we see gold bead and we see a gold biconical bead, okay? So all these items I'm showing you are items that would have been sold and bought during the Trans-Saharan trade, okay? So these are all very good items.
Trade, so, giving people stuff.
Exactly, so buying and selling. So for the biconical bead, which is this one, it is likely that this bead form travelled across the Sahara to West Africa in the medieval period. And then we see that small terracotta beads with distinctive biconical shape were made at, the Oases, which is a part of the ancient empire of Songhai. Okay, so more extravagant beads like this one, they're like the medieval Fatimid, were likely brought across the desert. So sometimes these types of gifts are given, in, sort of like diplomatic gifts. So it could be one country going to see somebody important in another country and, giving them a gift of beads. So does anybody know what these are?
Rocks.
Huh?
Rock.
They're rocks, but they're not rocks. They're salt slabs. So that's what salt looks like,
Salt.
you know, before it's sort of refined and processed. And
But
then we
our
have white salt.
But we have our salt is white.
Yes.
But this one is a bit brownish.
Yeah, it's a bit brownish. That's when it's harvested from the mines, and then it's sent to a processing centre, and it's even, you know, it's refined further. So by the time we're buying it from the shops in the supermarket, it's very white. In West Africa, during the medieval period, salt was traded for gold. So in these times, salt was very, very important. It wasn't something that everybody had access to. And because there was scarcity, right? Scarcity means that you can increase the value.
Why was salt very important?
Because not every nation had salt. So the nations that had salt were selling salt at the same price as gold.
Why do they need salt?
Because you need salt. You need salt to cook. You need salt to preserve things. Because when you have, like, you know, I don't know, maybe fish, meat, you salt it properly, and then that could last for months without it rotting. So salt was very, very important.
Oh.
So producing salt was a valuable trade item, and like I said, it could be exchanged for gold. In medieval West Africa, for example, the trade in salt led to the development of trade routes. So in fact, because a lot of West African countries were, you know, in the business of selling salt, that's how trade routes were created. Because obviously, if I am living here and I am producing something, right, people want to come to me to buy that item. So as a consequence, there's definitely going to be a route, because they know that in order for them to get what I'm selling, they've got to, you know, they've got to find access points in order to get to me. And hence, that's how a trade route is formed. And guess what? In the Roman period, right, soldiers were paid in salarium argentum. Do you know what that is?
No.
Salarium argentum. It's salt money. Salt money. So they were paid in salt money.
Salt.
And it is from this word that we get the word salary. So when you're saying salary is what you earn when, you know, when you do some work and someone pays you and you earn a salary, that's where that word was from salarium. That's where the word salary comes from. So
Salary.
salt transported by caravans were obtained from salt mines in the Sahara Desert. Who remembers what caravans are?
However,
Lots of camels.
Yes, caravans are lots of camels that are transporting goods and people. So in certain areas such as the Tagaza and the Taodimi, salt deposits can be found not far beneath the surface of the desert. And the salt, which was in the form of blocks, would then be loaded onto the backs of these camels and transported to the south, where they were then traded for gold. Okay? So next we see textiles from the Sahel. So these are sort of, these are more recent examples of textiles that are produced in these regions in Africa. So in the medieval times, these textiles would not be too far off from what we're seeing today. And what's very fantastic and amazing about these textiles is the complex and the timeless value that you can see in the textiles, that you can see in the woven cloth, even in the weaves. You can see the type of the weaving techniques. You can see that the designs are very different, and the symbols, you know, as it relates to, you know, regions. And you know what's also interesting about textiles is, remember that there are parts in Nigeria, like in the Yoruba culture, they have a specific fabric that's called asho-oke, right? And asho-oke, depending on the part of the Yoruba group that you're from, you have certain colors. So when you wear the asho-oke, for example, depending on the colors that you have on, people can easily identify that you're from this part of the Yoruba tribe. So you could be an Ijebu person, you could be from Ondo, you could be from, you know, Osun State, you could be from wherever, right? just based on the colours and the style of the weave of the ashoke. You know, people that know can tell. So I guess it's not going to be too far off from, you know, what these textiles looks like. So again, the region in these images is from the Sahel. And these textiles are more recent. They're like, you know, 1960s and 1980s. However, textile exhibitions have antecedents that date to the 11th century. So many products, including textiles, drove trade between North Africa and regions of the south of the Sahara. Now we come to the ugly part of history, which is the slave trade, the Arab slave trade. The Arab slave trade is also known as the Trans-Saharan slave trade, and slaves were transported across the Sahara.
So they were slaves?
Yes, you can see them. These are, unfortunately, him, you can see him, sadly, okay? Most of the slaves were moved from continental Africa to North Africa to be sold to the Mediterranean and Middle Eastern civilizations. It's estimated that 6 to 10 million slaves were taken from continental Africa to the Arab world. Arabs managed and operated the Trans-Saharan slave trade, although Berbers were also actively involved. More recent times, you know, since the overthrow of Gaddafi, who knows who Gaddafi is?
I don't know.
Okay, do you know who Gaddafi is? Gaddafi was the former president of Libya. So he was overthrown and Libya was sent into chaos, and they've been in a civil war since 2011. And you find that migrants from other parts of Africa, say West Africa, you know, for example, try to use Libya to access Europe. And unfortunately, they're vulnerable to people smugglers along that route or militia groups. And these people end up capturing them and selling them as slaves. So unfortunately today, slavery is still going on. Now, remember what I said a caravan is. So this will be what a caravan looks like. Okay? Can you see lots of camels in the, you know, Sahara Desert going somewhere? And that's how they would have loaded the camels. Can you see the goods on the camels? So in this image, it's Mauritanian leads a caravan of camels with sacks of raw salt. So
is that a boy?
So yes, so he is transporting salt, okay, and that's not going to be too different. Pardon?
He would be hot.
Yes, he would be hot. So he's transporting salt to some other parts of the continent. And remember that these guys had to brave the adverse weather in the desert. So things like sandstorms are not a joke in the desert.
So they happen a lot.
Yes. Do you know what a sandstorm is? Sandstorm is a wind that blows sand, and you can't do anything because sand is everywhere. You literally can't see anything, right?
So that means you have to be careful.
You have to be extremely careful. So here, can you see, do you know what this is?
The salt.
Very good. It's salt slabs again. So here is what is considered the white gold. Salt was very precious, and once upon a time it was very, 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 very expensive. That it was, you know, equivalent to what you would sell gold for.
That had it.
I wouldn't say it was only Africa, but Africa predominantly, they had like a lot of the salt mines.
So they had most of the salt.
Yeah, so you see, it was a highly priced commodity in North Africa. It was traded for gold, ounce for ounce. So whatever you were selling gold for, you would also sell salt for. So just to list some of the goods that travelled into the western region of continental Africa, it was glass, precious stones, and obviously North African ceramics. People of West Africa would obtain salt from plants and the soil, which would have been sufficient for local consumption. West Africa powers also, so the leaders, the kings, sought to control the trade routes. And this meant that whoever was in control could levy tariffs on the caravans that travelled along them. Salt mining, for example, which is what you can also see in this image, is still carried out today and continues to be a way of life for some desert inhabitants. And just like their medieval forebears, the salt mines today rely on camels to transport harvested salt. And remember, I just showed you the image of the young man from Mauritania. So you could see he loaded that camel with salt and it's off to the destination of where it needs to go. Now, another thing that made its way into Africa by way of the Trans-Saharan trade was Islam. So Islam made its way into Africa via the trade routes. Now, following the conquest of North Africa by Muslim Arabs in the 7th century CE, Islam spread through West Africa via merchants, traders, scholars, and missionaries. Islam arrived in East Africa when Arab traders crossed the Red Sea. Now, do you remember where the Red Sea is? So we can see, let's just go back to the map. Now look at the Red Sea. There's where we have the Red Sea. So this is where the Arab traders, crossing the Red Sea, it would have been easy for them to get into East Africa because this is East Africa. Do you remember that this is East Africa? Who remembers what this part is?
Somalia.
Yes, Somalia is actually in there. And that's the Horn of Africa, okay? That's the Horn of Africa, okay?
The Horn.
Yes, because
That's
it looks like the Horn. So, other than the genuine, spiritual conviction, African leaders may have recognized that adopting Islam could be beneficial to trade. So, for some of the African leaders, they weren't necessarily interested in Islam. They were just like, okay, these people come in, they're buying and selling from us. Yeah, let's just show some interest because that makes, doing business with them easier. There's no evidence in the Ghana Empire that the kings converted to Islam. Rather, they tolerated Muslim merchants and those from Ghana who wished to convert. So that's essentially like the Ghana king was not interested in Islam. He was just like, you know what, let's just do business with them, let them practice whatever they believe. And if there were people in Ghana that wanted to convert to Islam, he didn't hold them back. But it was not something that everybody sort of, gravitated towards. So now we look at the Ghana Empire. So the Ghana Empire was the first of the great West African empires that existed during the Middle Ages. And much of what we know about the Ghana Empire is actually through Arab sources. In medieval times, Ghana was known by its subjects, the Wagadu, which means land of herds. And Ghana was the title of the ruler. So Ghana Empire was founded by Diabe Sise, a younger son of Dinga, who is considered to be the ancestor of the Soninke people. The trade route passed through the territory of the Ghana Empire, and this contributed greatly to the wealth of the Ghana Empire. Ghana was one of the two powerful kingdoms in Western Sudan. So another empire that we're going to look at is the Mali Empire. Okay, so here is the Mali Empire. This is part of the Trans-Saharan trade route, okay? That's why Mali Empire is mentioned. Because if you remember, when we did Mansa Musa, we mentioned that he gained a lot of his wealth from trade and from also conquering other countries, if you remember that correctly. So in terms of the Mali Empire and its link with the Trans-Saharan trade, we see that gold was its most important commodity, and Mansa Musa was responsible for introducing the Mali Empire for introducing Islam to them. And also, if you remember correctly from Mansa Musa, he was one of the richest, wealthiest leaders of his time.
So he had so much gold you can't even count it.
Exactly.
And then he was spending it and giving it away.
Yeah. And then another empire that features prominently in the Trans-Saharan trade is the Songhai Empire. The largest empire in the history of Western Sudan is the Songhai Empire. And it grew from a small state of Gao, which was founded in between 500 and 700 AD. The empire grew in strength under Sunni Ali, right, or Ali Bir as he's known, in 1464. And within 28 years of Ali Bir's rule, he had converted this little state of Gao into a magnificent empire stretching from the Niger in the east to Djenné in the west, and from Timbuktu in the north to Hombasi in the south. Another prominent city that features in the Trans-Saharan trade is Timbuktu, which we looked at, under Mansa Musa. So Timbuktu was located in the southern edge of the Sahara Desert and 6 miles north of River Niger. Centuries-old significant city in West Africa. In the 14th century, it became the commercial hub, religious hub, cultural hub of West African empires of Mali and Songhai. And Timbuktu was known throughout West Africa, and its fame extended across oceans to Europe and Asia. Timbuktu's founding dates back to the 11th century when Tuareg nomads settled there and began using the site as a trading post of goods such as gold, ivory, salt, and along the Trans-Saharan caravan routes. Timbuktu's population included Berbers, Arabs, Jews, along with the Mande and the Fulani people, and was estimated to be 250,000 people at the height of prominence in the 15th century. Timbuktu's greater contribution to Islam and world civilization was its scholarship. By the 14th century, important books were written and copied in Timbuktu. So it was the center of learning, in the world. Very impressive. Now, Gao was situated near the north bend of the Niger River. It served as the capital city of the Songhai Kingdom. And Gao emerged as a powerful and wealthy political center located along the Trans-Saharan trade routes. Archaeological findings from potsherds and beads indicate that Gao had been inhabited since the 9th century. The advantage of Gao and its position was because it was located along the Niger River. So not only did you have access to natural resources such as the fish, right, it was also a secure water source for irrigation and travel. So, it helped commerce greatly. And also the annual deposits of silt helped maintain the fertile land. Next we come to Djenné. So Djenné, again, is a Songhai town, and its history is closely linked to that of Timbuktu. Most of the Trans-Saharan trading goods such as salt, gold, and people such as slaves that moved in and out of Timbuktu had to pass through Djenné. Djenné's prosperity depended on its trade. So without trade, Djenné, wouldn't have survived. Economically, it would not survive. Djenné is famous for its Sudanese-style architecture. And now we see a map of the trade routes. So just have a look at that. That is quite a network of trade. So you can see Djenné. Djenné's over here. And there's Gao. And look at Timbuktu that we've mentioned. We've mentioned Gaza. And here's the Ghana Empire. So the Trans-Saharan trade routes is the third major one of the global tapestry period. That's between 1200 and 1450. It is the most overlooked and underrated. The trade routes facilitated exchange of ideas, language, and religion. It has a vast network of interconnected routes, as you can see, all over continental Africa. Look at that, quite a network. To prepare for the trip, camels will be fattened up for the journey across the desert. So basically, these camels were fed. They had to be fed because they had to travel for, a long time. Caravans moved at about 3 miles per hour, and it took 40 days to cross the Sahara Desert. Beat that. Yeah, so it took 3 miles per hour. Can you imagine? 3 miles per hour. That's quite slow. But they need to travel that slowly because remember, it's hot.
Yeah, I know.
And because if they travel too quickly, they would be losing a lot of water. Very good. They'd lose a lot of water. Yeah, because they'll be sweating obviously and losing a lot of water, and then that will mean that they'd need to stop because they would need to fill up again. And that's why, remember I said they stopped at Oasis points whereby they'd refill, and those places where the camels would stop then became an entrepot, which then became like a sort of warehouse where people would store things for further distribution. The desert conditions were hostile. Remember, we said sandstorms, the heat, dehydration, then there was starvation because people would literally run out of food, and also robbery. You also had criminals that were out there. All their job was to steal from people, steal the goods, or steal the money, or steal the gold, right? So you had all these hostile conditions when you were traveling across the Sahara Desert. So Western trade routes were like from Morocco, so beginning at Siljamasa, going via Tagaza. Look at Tagaza. That's Tagaza on there. And then to Walata. So from Tagaza, it would go all the way to Walata. Then the route divided to Ghana and Jenne there, and then Mali, and later to Timbuktu. Okay? So middle route was from Tunisia, and Tunisia is somewhere over here. Middle route was from Tunisia via the Gadams, or Gadames, however you choose to pronounce that. And it would go all the way to Gat, which is here. So there was another route that would go there. And Gat and the Agadis, is here, and to the fertile area between the Niger and the Lake Chad. So another route connected North Africa with the Niger Bend by way of Gao and then to Timbuktu. The oldest route was from North Africa, probably from Tripoli, via Fezzan and Tibasti to the Lake Chad area. Okay, so now we have this explorer whose name was Mungo Park, and he was a Scottish explorer, and he went to explore the area around the River Niger. No European had been there before. His exploits brought him fame and glory, and he published his book of his exploits in 1799. It became an overnight literary sensation, selling out its first 2 editions in no time at all. The British government was keen for Mungo Park to use his talents in continuing their colonial and imperial expansion. They even proposed that he explore New Holland. Mungo Park is often considered a glorified travel writer, although his supporters would argue otherwise. And then we have Heinrich Barth. He was a German explorer. Barth joined the expedition to Lake Chad in 1849, aiming to establish closer contacts with the Empire of Bornu. It took him 5 years to make this journey. His 3 companions died during the journey, and in Germany, they actually thought he had died too. His 3,500 page magnum opus which is his greatest writing, called Travels and Discoveries in North and Central Africa in the years 1849 to 1855, is considered the greatest individual achievement in the 19th century African studies. His report deals at length with different ethnic groups and regions, providing a wealth of information in languages, customs, political institutions, and Islam in Africa. So what you'd see from this man's expedition is it's almost like he was a secret service agent that just went in and took copious notes and observed the cultures of people, how they interacted amongst themselves, what they were persuaded by in terms of their religion, and he documented everything so well that if you were reading it, it was almost like you were present with him as he was going on this expedition. And that's probably a reason why, his work was regarded so highly. But what I would like to tease out of you guys is, whenever you're doing anything, like when it comes to research or whatever, that should be your objective. Like, obviously, it's not a good thing that he was able to get into the culture and invade it in that way and get so much information out that was then exploited later on. But one of the things that you can get from what he's done is how he did it, and you can aim that whatever document you are putting together, you are writing, that you do it to the best of your ability, so that whoever comes after you and is reading your material has a sense, almost feels like they were there with you on that journey. Right, so here we see the Trans-Saharan road corridor. So that's a massive road, and this is competing with the Camel Caravans. So this is where vehicles can make their journey across the same routes, and this is actually quite a positive thing, I'd say. So the timeline. So here we see that 2000 BCE is the beginning of the Trans-Saharan trade, and in the 8th century, that was the peak of the trade under the Ghana Empire. 13th century, we see that Mali takes over and it controls and prospers from the trade. In the 16th century, there's a decline, and this decline is due to competition from seafaring routes. And then in the 19th century, we see that European explorers contribute to the documentation of the trade's history. And in present times today, we see that the African Union and the African Development Bank help build road from Algiers to Lagos to boost trade across the Sahara Desert, which was what we saw in this image. So that's part of the development of the trade route, okay? So, quiz! Question 1. What was one of the most valuable commodities traded in the Trans-Saharan trade? A. Gold. B. Textiles. C. Salt. Question 2. Which animal was used for travel across the Sahara Desert in the Trans-Saharan trade? A. Horses. B. Camels. C. Elephants. Question 3. What is the nickname for salt in the Trans-Saharan trade? A. Desert gold. B. Black salt. C. White gold. Question 4. Which religion spread across continental Africa through the Trans-Saharan trade? A. Buddhism. B. Hinduism. C. Islam. Question 5. What contributed to the decline of the Trans-Saharan trade in the 16th century? A. Modern means of travel. B. Invasions by Europeans. C. Competition from seafaring trade routes. Answers. So, did you get them all right?
Yeah, I got them.
Conclusion. The Trans-Saharan trade linked North Africa with continental Africa, fostering cultural exchange and economic prosperity. So you can see that this trade route was very important through exchange of goods and services. Its legacy continues to influence the region's history, culture and traditions, making it a pivotal moment in Africa's rich history. So we still have remnants of the culture. We can see it from the buildings, we can see it from the textiles, the influences that come from all over different parts of Africa. We can see that influence today. And then finally, we see that the African Union and the African Development Bank helped build a huge road from the Algiers to Lagos through the Tamanrasset to boost trade across the Sahara Desert, and hopefully this will lead to other expansions of other kinds, maybe not just roads, maybe rail, you know, who knows, but it's a positive thing, and hopefully it will continue to boost trade across the Sahara Desert.